Deep in the frozen wilds of Vinland, beneath a cairn older than memory, a spear forged in the heart of Yggdrasil lies buried, its runes still pulsing with the breath of the gods. When the Skeld and Drakos clans uncover it, they awaken a power not seen since the days of Ragnarok. A weapon that can command the fate of mortals and challenge the rule of Odin himself. But the Norns have already spun their thread prophecy, speaks of betrayal, of star-crossed blood, and a love that could shatter divine order. The gods are watching, their whispers carried on the wind through ancient cider magic, and every choice now echoes in the halls of Valhalla. This is no longer a war of axes and honor. It's a battle for survival against the very forces that shape the Nine Worlds. Before we sail deeper into this saga, take a moment to subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. The Norse world is full of forgotten stories, and this is just one carved in the runestone of time. If you crave epic Viking sagas, mysterious discoveries from the fjords, and the stories the Skalds dared not tell, stay with us, because this tale will pull you into the mists of Midgard itself. The Raffin's fury, carved through the northern seas like a blade of obsidian, its dragon-headed prow splitting the waves as if the ocean itself recoiled from its passage. Salt spray lashed the faces of the raiders, stinging their eyes and biting their skin, but they stood unyielding, their hands gripping the hilts of their axes and the ropes of the ship's taut sails. The wind howled through the rigging, carrying the scent of brine and the distant tang of something old or something sacred. Above them, the sky churned with a storm not born of nature, but of divine will. Thunder rumbled, not as a mere echo of the heavens, but as a war drum beating a warning. Lightning cracked the darkness, its jagged veins of fire illuminating the faces of the warriors, their expressions a mosaic of grim determination and unspoken dread. Jorund Skeldrson stood at the ship's helm, his broad shoulders hunched against the gale, his grip firm on the tiller. His dark hair, slicked back by the rain, clung to his forehead, and his eyes cold, steel gray scanned the horizon as though searching for an enemy that had yet to reveal itself. He was a man of the Skeld clan, a name whispered in both reverence and fear across the fjords. His axe, Mjolnir, rested at his side, its blade etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the storm's glow. Yet even as he commanded the ship, his thoughts were elsewhere, tangled in the weight of an oath he had sworn to his kin and the unshakable hatred that bound him to the Drakos clan. A cry from the bow snapped him from his reverie. A ship on the starboard. Jorund turned, his gaze locking onto a second longship, cutting through the storm, its sails tattered, but its presence undeniable. The Drakos banner a serpent, coiled around a broken spear flapped in the wind, a symbol of the blood feud that had poisoned their people for generations. Among the warriors on the opposing vessel, one figure stood apart. She was smaller than the others, her form wrapped in a cloak of deep crimson, but her presence commanded the sea itself. Lysandra Drakos. She had been a name spoken in hushed tones among the Skeld warriors, a legend as much as a woman. Her father, Kallias Drakos, had once led raids that left the Skeld land scorched, and her mother, a priestess of Athena, had been said to walk the line between mortal and divine. Lysandra's eyes, sharp and amber as molten gold, met Jorund's. Across the churning waters, in that instant, the storm seemed to still, the thunder fading into a low hum, as if the gods themselves held their breath. "You should not be here," Jorund muttered, though the words felt hollow even to him. Lysandra's lips curled into a smile that was neither cruel nor kind, but something in between, a promise, a threat, a challenge. Neither should you. The sea roared again, and the storm surged with renewed fury, as though the very elements sought to separate them. But Jorund did not look away. His hand drifted to the hilt of Mjolnir, not in readiness for battle, but as if to steady himself against the pull of something greater. The storm was not merely a tempest, it was a test. And somewhere, beyond the veil of rain and lightning, a voice deep and resonant as the earth itself boomed through the chaos. Choose, mortals unite and wield the artifact of Vinland, or perish and unleash Ragnarok anew. The word struck Jorund like a blow, leaving him breathless. He glanced at Lysandra, and for the first time, he saw not an enemy, but a mirror. A reflection of the same impossible choice, the same forbidden longing. The storm raged on, but in that moment, the world narrowed to the space between them, to the unspoken truth that neither could deny. Their fates were no longer their own, and the gods were watching. The storm broke as suddenly as it had come, leaving the Hrafn's fury and its sister ships adrift in a silence thick with unease. The sea, once a churning maelstrom, now lay still, its surface reflecting the blood-orange glow of the setting sun. Before the raiders stood the archipelago, a cluster of islands shrouded in mist, their jagged cliffs clawing at the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and something older, something metallic and sacred. Jorund's boots struck the blackened sand as the war band disembarked, their weapons glinting in the dim light. The land was unlike anything they had known. Towering stone monoliths, carved with runes that shimmered faintly in the gloom, stood like silent sentinels. Between them, ruins of a forgotten civilization sprawled across the shore, crumbling columns etched with Greek glyphs, their inscriptions worn by time, but still pulsing with an eerie vitality. A shattered statue of a winged serpent lay half buried in the sand, its eyes glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. This place, it's not meant for mortals, muttered Dorn Volkov, Jorund's blood brother, his hand resting on the hilt of his axe. His voice carried the weight of superstition, but Jorund saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. Then why did the storm bring us here? Lysandra Drakos' voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. She stood at the edge of the group, her crimson cloak billowing in the wind. Her gaze was fixed on the ruins, her expression unreadable. The gods do not act without purpose. Athena's influence was palpable in her stance, though Jorund could not say how he knew. He had seen the way her steps seemed to align with the patterns of the ruins, as though she were following a path only she could see. But Odin's ravens were already circling overhead, their black feathers glinting like obsidian. Jorund felt their presence like a cold hand on his spine, whispering doubts into the ears of his men. Betrayal lingers in the shadows, one of the warriors muttered, his voice low. The Drakos have always been spies. Jorund clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He could not afford division, not now. The islands were a trap, a test, and the gods were watching. But before he could speak, the ground trembled. From the depths of the blackened forest, a roar split the air, a sound that was neither beast nor man, but something in between. The war band drew their weapons as a massive shape emerged from the trees, its scales glistening like wet stone. A sea serpent, its body coiled with the power of the ocean. its eyes burning with the fury of Poseidon. "Defend the ships," Jorund barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The battle was swift and brutal. The serpent's coils lashed out, smashing into the wooden hulls of the longships, sending splinters flying. Warriors clashed with the creature, their axes and spears bouncing off its armored hide. Lysandra moved with a grace that belied her mortal form, her spear striking true as she drove it into the serpent's flank. The beast roared, its pain echoing through the island, but it was not alone. From the water's edge, a second creature rose, this one with multiple heads, each snarling and writhing. A hydrodot, the warband froze. The gods had made their move. Jorund's mind raced. The Hydra was no mere monster. It was a weapon, a manifestation of Poseidon's wrath. And yet, as he locked eyes with Lysandra, he saw the same realization dawning in her gaze. This was not a battle to be won with steel alone. "Together," she said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. He nodded, and without another word, they moved as one. Jorund's axe cleaved through the nearest head, while Lysandra's spear drove into the beast's neck, its blood spilling like ink into the sand. The other warriors followed, their initial hesitation giving way to desperation. But the Hydra was relentless. Its heads regrew, its bodies twisting as if the very earth sought to protect it. The island itself seemed to pulse with ancient power, the ruins around them shifting, as though the land remembered the wars of the gods. Then, the voice came again, deep and resonant, vibrating through the bones of the earth. "Choose, mortals unite and wield the artifact of Vinland, or perish and unleash Ragnarok anew." The words sent a shiver through Jorund's spine. The artifact, the spear, it was real. And the gods were not merely watching, they were waiting not as the Hydra's next head lunged toward Lysandra. Jorund surged forward, his axe raised. But before he could strike, a shadow moved beside him. Bjorn. His blood brother's blade gleamed in the dim light, but instead of attacking the Hydra, he turned it on Jorund. "Your loyalty is a curse," Bjorn snarled, his eyes wild with something beyond rage. "The gods have chosen their champions. You will not stand in their way." Jorund barely managed to parry the blow, the impact sending a jolt through his arm. The warband's cries faded into the background as he and Bjorn clashed, their blades ringing like the hammers of the dwarves. But even as he fought, Jorund's mind was elsewhere, on Lysandra, on the spear, on the choice that had been thrust upon them. The Hydra's roar filled the air, and the island trembled. The gods were done with tests. The time for choices had come. The island's air was thick with the scent of blood and ash, the remnants of the Hydra's defeat lingering like a curse. Jorund's breath came in ragged gasps as he stood over Bjorn's motionless body, the weight of his own blade pressing into the wound he had inflicted. The moon, a sickly red, hung low over the ruins, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe with ancient malice. Around him, the warband moved in uneasy silence, their faces etched with the same questions that gnawed at his mind. Had they won? Or had they only deepened the gods' game? Bjorn's final words still echoed in Jorund's skull. Only star-crossed. Blood can end the gods' war. The words were a riddle, a warning, but they carried the weight of prophecy. He had always believed in fate, in the word that wove the threads of mortal lives. But now, as he gazed at the corpse of the man who had once been his brother in arms, He wondered if the gods had already decided their fates. Lysandra approached, her crimson cloak trailing behind her like a stain on the earth. Her eyes, usually sharp with defiance, were shadowed with something else, regret? Or perhaps the exhaustion of a woman who had seen too much. She knelt beside Bjorn, her fingers brushing the cold skin of his cheek, and for a moment, Jorund thought she might weep. But she did not. Instead, she rose, her gaze meeting his with a quiet intensity. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Jorund's jaw tightened. "He would have killed me, and you would have killed him." She stepped closer, the distance between them a chasm of unspoken truths. But this is not the way. He wanted to argue, to tell her that the gods had forced his hand, that the choice had not been his. But the words died on his tongue, because deep down he knew the truth. Bjorn had not been the first to turn against him. The war band was fracturing, and the gods were feeding the fire. The night was not kind to the wounded. As the war band made camp among the ruins, the air grew heavy with whispers of betrayal, of shifting loyalties, of promises made to gods who cared nothing for mortal lives. Jorund could feel the tension in every glance, every hushed conversation. Some of his men had already pledged themselves to Freya's favor, their eyes gleaming with the promise of divine power. Others, like Bjorn, had been seduced by Ares. Fury, their blades thirsting for blood not just of enemies, but of kin. Odin's ravens circled overhead, their cries a constant reminder of the gods' watchful gaze. Jorund had felt their whispers in his mind, their voices threading through his thoughts like a poison. "Your love is a weakness. Your clan is your duty." The words were not new, but they had never felt so suffocating. And then there was Athena. In the dead of night, she came to Lysandra in a dream, her presence as tangible as the wind through the trees. The goddess of wisdom and war stood before her form wreathed in the glow of 1,000 stars. "You carry the blood of the gods," Athena said, her voice a melody of thunder and silk. "But power without purpose is a curse. Will you wield it, or let it consume you?" Lysandra awoke with a start, her hands trembling. The dream had left her breathless, her mind a battlefield of conflicting desires. She had always known she was different, her mother's divine blood, the whispers at Athena's favor. But now, the goddess's words haunted her. Power without purpose is a curse. What did that mean? That her love for Jorund was a weakness? That her loyalty to her clan was a chain? She found Jorund staring into the fire, his face a mask of exhaustion. When she approached, he did not look up. "You should not be here," he said, his voice hoarse. "And you should not be alone." He finally met her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The firelight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of weariness that had deepened since they had set foot on the island. But there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of something raw, something vulnerable. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I swore an oath to my clan, to my people, but I can't turn my back on you." Lysandra's chest tightened. "You don't have to, but you must choose, Jorund. The gods are watching, and they will not wait forever." Before he could answer, a sharp cry split the air. The war band had stirred, their voices rising in alarm. Jorund and Lysandra turned to see a group of warriors dragging a figure toward the center of the camp. It was a Drakos warrior, his face bloodied, his hands bound. Traitor. One of the Skeld warriors spat, his voice thick with anger. He was seen with the Drakos. Lysandra's breath caught. She knew who it was. It was Kale, a young warrior from her own clan, her cousin. The warband surged forward, their weapons drawn, their fury a storm waiting to break. Jorund stepped between them and Kale, his axe raised. Enough, he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. This is not the way. But the damage was done. The secret was out. Lysandra's heart pounded as Kale's eyes met hers. There was no shame in his gaze, only defiance. You should have stayed in your own world, Lysandra, he said, his voice steady despite the blood trickling from his lip. You've brought ruin upon us all. The words struck her like a blow. She had always known this would come to light, but she had hoped foolishly that it would not be like this. Jorund turned to her, his expression unreadable. Is this true? She hesitated. The truth was a blade, and she did not know which way it would fall. Yes, she said finally. But it was not betrayal. It was love. The war band erupted. The night became a storm of violence. Jorund fought to hold the war band together, his voice a command that rang through the chaos. But the seeds of division had already taken root. Some of his men turned on the Drakos, their axes flashing in the firelight. Others, swayed by the whispers of Freya and Ares, saw opportunity in the discord. Lysandra stood at the edge of it all, her heart a battlefield of its own. She had always known that love was a dangerous thing, but she had never imagined it would cost her everything. And then, as the warband's fury reached its peak, a new sound rose above the chaos, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the island. The ruins around them pulsed with light, the runes and glyphs glowing with an otherworldly energy. The gods were watching. Jorund turned to Lysandra, his eyes searching hers. We must leave this place, he said, his voice urgent, before the gods decide our fates for us. She nodded, but as they turned to flee, the ground trembled. From the shadows of the ruins, a figure emerged, a warrior clad in dark armor, his eyes burning with the fire of Ares. Not so fast, he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. The gods have chosen their champions, and you, Jorund Skeldrson, will not stand in their way. Jorund's grip tightened on Nilera. The final battle had begun, but as the clash of steel and fury filled the air, Lysandra could not shake the feeling that the gods had already decided the outcome, and that the only way to end this war was with the blood of star-crossed lovers. The sea roared like a living thing, its waves rising in jagged teeth that crashed against the Raffin's fury and its sister ships with a fury no mortal could withstand. The storm was not of the natural world. It was a creature of divine wrath, summoned by Poseidon's will to test the resilience of the warband. Lightning split the sky in violent arcs, illuminating the darkened fleet as they fought to stay afloat. The wind howled through the rigging, tearing at sails and sending men sprawling across the decks. Jorund stood at the helm, his hands gripping the tiller as the ship lurched violently. The sea was alive, its currents twisting in unnatural patterns, as if the ocean itself had turned against them. Behind him, Lysandra clung to the rail, her crimson cloak whipping around her like a banner of defiance. Her face was pale, her breath coming in shallow gasps, but her eyes burned with determination. We cannot outrun this, she called over the cacophony of wind and water. We must face it, Jorund turned to her, his jaw set. "And how do you propose we do that?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she closed her eyes, her fingers curling into her palms, as if drawing strength from the very hair around her. A faint glow emanated from her, a soft, golden light that pulsed in rhythm with the storm. It was Athena's blessing, the goddess's favor manifesting in her form. The wind stilled for a heartbeat, and the waves seemed to hesitate as though the sea itself recognized the power she wielded. Then, the light flared. A surge of energy rippled through the air, and the storm responded. The winds shifted, no longer howling in chaos, but bending to Lysandra's will. The waves, once towering monoliths of destruction, began to subside, their fury tempered by her presence. But the cost was evident. Her body trembled, her knees nearly giving way as the divine power drained her. Jorund caught her before she fell, his grip firm on her shoulders. "You're pushing too hard," he said, his voice tight with concern. She managed a weak smile. "If I don't, we'll all be lost." The Raffin's fury was not the only ship battling the storm. The other longships, their crews scrambling to keep their vessels from capsizing, were caught in the same maelstrom. But even as Lysandra's influence stabilized their path, another threat emerged from the depths. From the churning waters, a monstrous shape rose, a serpentine beast with scales like blackened iron, its eyes glowing with the cold fire of the abyss. More followed, their sinuous bodies writhing as they broke the surface, their mouths gaping wide to reveal rows of jagged teeth. Sea serpents, summoned by Poseidon's wrath, their forms twisted by the god's fury. "Hold the line," Jorund bellowed, his voice cutting through the storm. He swung Muleira, the axe's runes flaring as it met the first of the beasts. The clash of steel and scale was deafening, the ship's deck slick with blood and seawater as the warriors fought to keep the creatures at bay. Lysandra, still trembling, raised her spear. "Athena's will guides my hand," she whispered, and the weapon glowed with a divine light. She drove it into the nearest serpent, the tip piercing its flesh, with a force that sent the beast thrashing back into the sea. But the effort left her staggering, her breath ragged. The storm was not the only enemy. From the shadows of the fleet, figures moved, Odin's agents, their faces hidden beneath cloaks of shadow. They worked in silence, sabotaging ropes, cutting, rigging, and slipping into the water to sink the ships. Jorund saw them, his blood running cold. "They're trying to drown us," he growled, his gaze sweeping the deck. "We can't fight the sea in them." Lysandra's eyes met his, and in that moment, they understood. They had to move faster, to reach the shore before the gods. Schemes consumed them. "Together," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. Jorund nodded, and without another word, they moved as one. The Raffin's fury cut through the waves, its crew fighting valiantly against the serpents and the treachery of the shadows. The storm raged on, but Lysandra's power held it at bay, her breath shallow, her strength waning. Jorund fought beside her, his axe a blur of steel and fury, his every strike fueled by the knowledge that their survival depended on their unity, not as the last of the serpents sank into the depths. The storm began to shift. The clouds parted, revealing a distant shape on the horizon, a fortress, its towers rising from the cliffs like the bones of a long-dead giant. It was the place the gods had spoken of, the one rumored to hold the spear. But as the warband neared the shore, The sea itself seemed to resist them. The waves grew wilder, the wind howling with a new, unearthly sound. From the depths, a new creature emerged, a beast of nightmare, its form a grotesque fusion of Norse and Greek myth. It was akin of Fenrir, its massive body covered in bristling fur, its eyes glowing with the madness of the underworld. And behind it, a shadow moved long, sinuous, and impossibly tall. The Minotaur's kin, its form a twisted mockery of mortal flesh. The gods had not finished testing them. Lysandra and Jorund stood at the prow of the ship, their breaths mingling in the cold air. The fortress loomed ahead, its gates sealed by the will of the gods. "This is no ordinary trial," Lysandra said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her limbs. "No," Jorund agreed, "but we've come this far. We don't turn back now." The storm howled one final time, and then, as if the gods themselves had deemed them worthy, the waters stilled. The path to the fortress was clear, but as the Raffin's fury grounded on the shore, a voice echoed through the air, deep and resonant, carrying the weight of the cosmos. To claim the spear, you must first survive the labyrinth, face the trials of Fenrir's kin and the Minotaur's shadow. Only then will the gods grant you their favor. The words hung in the air, a challenge and a warning. And as the warband stepped onto the land, the gates of the fortress creaked open, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The labyrinth awaited. The final test had begun. The entrance to the labyrinth loomed before them, a jagged maw of black stone carved with runes that pulsed faintly, as though the very walls remembered the blood spilled within. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older something. Sacred. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the threshold, their breaths shallow, their hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what lay ahead. The fortress had been a trial of the sea, but this was a trial of the soul. The moment they stepped inside, the world shifted. The labyrinth was no mere structure of stone and shadow. It was alive, its corridors twisting and folding upon themselves, as if the gods themselves had woven it from the threads of fate. The walls were lined with carvings, Norse runic symbols mingled with Greek inscriptions, their meanings lost to time, but their power undeniable. At the center of the chamber, a great bronze door stood, its surface etched with the image of a serpent, devouring its own tail, a symbol of the eternal cycle of gods and mortals. A voice, low and resonant, echoed through the chamber. To claim the spear, you must first prove your worth. Face the trials of the gods, and let your choices define your fate. The words sent a shiver through Jorund's spine. He turned to Lysandra, but her gaze was fixed on the door, her expression unreadable. "This is no ordinary test," she murmured. "The gods are watching." Before they could speak further, the air around them rippled, and the labyrinth responded. The walls shifted, the floor beneath their feet dissolving into a vast, open expanse. The sky above was a swirling vortex of stars and storm, and at the center of it all stood a figure Odin, his one eye gleaming with the knowledge of all things. "You have come far, mortals," the god intoned, his voice a storm in itself. "But strength alone is not enough. You must face the truth of your hearts." The world around them dissolved, and suddenly, Jorund was no longer in the labyrinth. He stood in the Skeld clan's longhouse, the firelight casting long shadows across the wooden beams. His kin were there, his brothers, his father, their faces twisted with betrayal. "You have forsaken your blood," His father's voice rang out, cold as winter. You would side with the Drakos, with the enemy of our people. You are no longer. Skeld. Jorund's chest tightened. He reached for Mjolnir, but the axe was gone. His hands were empty, his power stripped. I did what I had to, he said, his voice hoarse. I chose love over war. His father's eyes burned. Love is a weakness, and you have paid the price. A vision shifted, and Jorund found himself standing on the shore of the island, the Raffin's fury wrecked and sinking into the waves. Lysandra stood at the edge of the cliff, her face pale, her eyes filled with sorrow. You should have stayed with your people, she said, her voice breaking. This was never meant to be. No, Jorund whispered, reaching for her. You are my people now? But as his fingers brushed hers, the vision shattered. He awoke to the sound of his own heartbeat, the labyrinth's cold stone pressing against his back. Lysandra knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You were gone for moments, she said, her voice tight with concern. What did you? See? He hesitated, then shook his head. The gods showed me what I fear most, that I could lose everything. Lysandra's gaze softened, but she did not speak. Instead, the labyrinth stirred again, and the air grew heavy with the scent of incense and something metallic blood. The walls pulsed, and a new voice rose, this one softer, more insidious. You seek power, but do you understand its cost? Athena. The chamber around them transformed. The walls became a vast hall of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of themselves. In one, Lysandra stood alone, her spear in hand, the Drakos clan bowing before her. In another, Jorund was crowned king of the Skeld, his people rejoicing, but Lysandra's face was etched with grief. In yet another, they stood together, their love a beacon of unity, but the world around them burned, the gods' war raging unchecked. Power is not given, Athena's voice whispered. It is taken. Will you take it, even if it costs you everything? Lysandra's breath caught. She stepped forward, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of hope and dread. I would do anything to end the gods' war, she said, her voice steady. But I will not sacrifice my people for it. The mirrors shattered, and the labyrinth groaned as if in protest. The path ahead opened, revealing a corridor lined with statues of warriors. Some Norse, some Greek, their faces frozen in expressions of triumph and despair. At the end of the passage, a single figure stood, their form obscured by shadow. Jorund and Lysandra exchanged a glance, then moved forward. The air grew colder, the weight of the gods pressing down on them. As they neared the figure, the shadows parted, and they saw who it was. But this was not the Bjorn they had known. His body was broken, his armor dented, his eyes hollow with something deeper than death. He looked up at them, his voice a whisper. You were never meant to win? Lysandra's heart clenched. Bjorn, what happened to you? He did not answer. Instead, he raised a hand, and the ground beneath them trembled. The labyrinth's walls began to close in, the air thickening with the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes. Jorund's grip tightened. On Mjolnir, we have to move, but Lysandra hesitated. This isn't real, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's a test. It's a trap, Jorund countered. And if we don't move, we'll be buried in it. They ran. The corridor twisted, the walls shifting like living things. But Jorund and Lysandra pressed on, their bond the only thing anchoring them. The shadows closed in, but they did not falter down at last. They emerged into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. At the center stood a pedestal, and upon it rested the spear, its shaft gleaming with a light that seemed to come from within, its tip pulsing with the power of both Norse and Greek smiths. Lysandra's breath caught. "It's real." Jorund stepped forward, his hand reaching for the weapon. But as his fingers brushed the spear's surface, the earth beneath them trembled. The chamber shuddered, the runes on the walls flaring to life, and a voice deep, ancient, and filled with the weight of the cosmos boomed through the air. "The balance is broken. The gods' war has begun." The spear's light flared, and the labyrinth itself seemed to scream. And as the ground cracked beneath their feet, Jorund and Lysandra knew the final battle was only just beginning. The spear pulsed in Jorund's hands, its shaft a fusion of black iron and golden bronze, etched with runes that shimmered like trapped starlight. The weapon was no mere tool of war. It was a relic of a time when the gods themselves had woven their will into mortal hands. Its tip, a jagged shard of obsidian, seemed to drink the light around it, while its haft hummed with a resonance that vibrated through Jorund's bones. He could feel it. Power, ancient and unyielding, as if the very fabric of the world had been stitched into its form. Lysandra's breath caught. "This is it," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she reached for the spear. The artifact of Vinland. But as her hand neared the weapon, the air around them shifted. A low, resonant hum filled the chamber, and the runes on the walls flared to life, casting the space in a kaleidoscope of gold and shadow. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a voice deep as the roots of Yggdrasil, sharp as a blade, boomed through the labyrinth. "You dare to touch what was never meant for mortals?" Jorund turned, his grip tightening on the spear. From the shadows of the chamber, two figures emerged, one cloaked in the storm, the other wreathed in the glow of 1,000 suns. Odin, his one eye blazing with the knowledge of all things, stood before them, his ravens perched on his shoulders, like silent judges. "The spear is not a gift," he intoned, his voice a storm in itself. "It is a burden. To wield it is to bear the weight of the gods' war. Will you carry it, or will you be broken by it?" Athena followed, her presence a counterpoint to Odin's thunder. Her armor gleamed with the sheen of tempered steel, her eyes sharp with the wisdom of ages. "You have the blood of the gods in your veins, Lysandra," she said, her gaze fixed on the warrior maiden. "But power without purpose is a curse. Will you shape the fate of the world, or let it be shaped by others?" The chamber seemed to hold its breath. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the center of a storm of divine will, the spear between them, a symbol of both hope and ruin. Odin's voice cut through the silence. "The Skeld clan has long been bound to the gods of Asgard. Your bloodline is marked by duty. Take the spear, and you will stand as a champion of the Norse. But know this, your choices will shape the fate of the world, and the price will be steep." Athena stepped forward, her gaze piercing. "The Drakos have always been favored by the gods of Olympus. Your mother's blood carries the wisdom of Athena, and your heart is not bound by the chains of fate. Take the spear, and you will forge a new path, one where the gods' war is ended, not by conquest, but by understanding." Jorund's knuckles whitened around the spear's haft. He could feel its power pressing against his soul, a force that was both intoxicating and terrifying. He had spent his life fighting for his clan, for the honor of the Skeld. But now, standing at the precipice of something greater, he wondered if his duty had ever been his own. Lysandra's voice was quiet, but steady. "And if we refuse?" Odin's gaze darkened. "Then the gods will decide for you." Before Jorund could respond, the chamber shuddered. The walls groaned, and the air grew thick with the scent of burning incense and something more primal blood. The spear's light flared, and the labyrinth itself seemed to recoil, as if the very foundation of the world had been disturbed. A third figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in the darkness of the underworld. Hades. His presence was a void, a silence so complete it pressed against the edges of reality. "The gods play their games," he rumbled, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of eternity. "But the mortals pay the price. Will you be the ones to end this war, or the ones to fuel it?" The chamber erupted in chaos. The runes on the walls blazed, and the air crackled with energy. Jorund and Lysandra staggered, their connection to each other flickering like a candle in the wind. The spear's power was no longer just a force of the gods. It was a force of them, a reflection of their choices, their fears, their love. Lysandra's hand found Jorund's, and for a moment, the storm around them stilled. "We can't let the gods decide our fate," she said, her voice a whisper of defiance. "We've come too far." Jorund met her gaze, and in that instant, he saw the truth. The spear was not just a weapon, it was a mirror, revealing the path they had to take. But the path was not clear. It was a choice between two futures, both fraught with peril. Odin's voice returned, low and insistent. "Choose, Jorund. The gods will not wait forever." Athena's gaze was equally unyielding. "Lysandra, your people need you, but your heart is not bound by their chains." The spear's light flared, and the labyrinth trembled. The gods' voices clashed in a cacophony of thunder and storm. But Jorund and Lysandra stood unmoving, their hands locked together, their bond the only thing anchoring them. Then, a final voice rose calm, measured, and filled with the weight of the cosmos. "The final battle approaches. Choose your side, or be crushed beneath the gods' wrath." The words echoed through the chamber, and as the last syllable faded, the spears light flared one final time dot, and the world changed. The air over the island thickened with the scent of smoke and blood, the war band's fires flickering like the breath of a sleeping giant. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of the Skeld and Drakos encampments, their forces drawn together. An uneasy alliance, but the tension between them was a storm of its own. The clans had come to the island not just to claim the spear, but to claim victory, and the gods had ensured that victory would come at a cost. Freya Melantha, the seeress, moved among the warriors like a shadow of fate itself. Her silver hair, streaked with the ash of her visions, framed a face etched with the weight of prophecy. She had come to the warband with warnings, but her words were as shifting as the northern winds. "The path is not clear," she murmured. To Jorund, her voice a whisper of thunder. "The gods do not speak with one tongue. One will guide you to glory, another to ruin." Lysandra, ever the skeptic, narrowed her eyes. "And which tongue do you speak, seer?" Freya's gaze met hers. Unreadable. "The truth is a blade, Drakos. It cuts both ways." But even as she spoke, the gods were already at work. Loki, the trickster, had woven his influence into the warband's ranks, his presence felt in the whispers that spread like wildfire. "The spear is not meant for mortals," a warrior muttered to his kin, his voice laced with doubt. "The gods will not let you wield it without paying the price." Others, swayed by Ares' fury, saw the spear as a weapon to be claimed by force, their loyalty to the Drakos and Skeld clans eroding under the weight of divine promises. And in the shadows, Hades' agents moved. The dead stirred in the burial mounds, their hollow eyes glowing with the light of the underworld. The war-band scouts returned with tales of spectral warriors, their forms shifting between flesh and bone, their weapons dripping with the ichor of the damned. "The gods are not content with mortal blood," one of the warriors said, his voice trembling. "They hunger for more." Jorund and Lysandra tried to hold the fragile alliance together, but the fractures were deep. The Skeld warriors, bound by their oaths to Odin, saw Lysandra's Drakos blood as a curse, while the Drakos, wary of Jorund's Skeld heritage, questioned whether he could truly stand against the gods' will. Even among their own ranks, the warband was divided. Some whispered that the spear's power was too great, that it would consume them all. Others, driven by the promise of divine favor, sought to claim it for themselves. It was in this chaos that the first betrayal struck. A scout returned from the eastern cliffs, his face pale with terror. "The Drakos have sent envoys to the Skeld," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they are not alone. There are others figures, cloaked in shadow, their faces hidden. They speak of a pact, a secret alliance." Jorund's blood ran cold. "Who?" The scout hesitated. "They called themselves the Eidolon, the Unseen. They claim to serve no god, but their power is unnatural." Lysandra's hand tightened on her spear. "This is no ordinary betrayal," she said, her voice low. "The gods have sent their agents to shape the war in their favor." But Jorund had no time to dwell on the revelation. The warband's camp erupted in chaos as a new threat emerged from the east, a column of warriors, their banners bearing the sigil of the Skeld and Drakos intertwined, but their faces marked with the blackened runes of Hades. "Traitors!" A Skeld warrior bellowed, his axe raised. "You would side with the dead?" The leader of the envoys stepped forward, his face obscured by a mask of bone. "We serve no god," he said, his voice a hollow echo. "Only the balance. The spear is not meant for mortals. It will destroy you all." The warband surged forward, but Jorund raised a hand, his voice cutting through the din. "Stand down," he barked. "This is a test, a trap." But the leader of the envoys only smiled. "A trap? No, Skeld. This is the beginning of the end." As the first clash of steel rang out, the ground trembled. From the depths of the island, a new sound rose, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the earth. The gods were watching, and they were waiting. And in the shadows, Freya Melantha watched as well, her silver eyes reflecting the storm that was about to break. "The chessboard is set," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. "And the pawns are already moving." The secret alliance had been revealed, but the question remained: who had truly orchestrated the betrayal? And what price would the warband pay for the truth? The final battle was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and the gods had already chosen their pieces. The fortress loomed before them, its stone walls slick with the rain of divine storms, its towers jagged against the blood-red sky. It was a relic of a forgotten age, its gates barred with iron and magic. its ramparts lined with warriors who had long since abandoned the laws of mortal warfare. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the forefront of the warband, their forces pressing against the fortress's defenses, but the air itself seemed to resist them. The wind howled through the narrow pass, carrying whispers that were not of this world voices, that spoke in tongues older than the fjords, their words laced with the promise of madness. The siege began with a thunderous clash of steel and stone. The Skeld and Drakos warriors advanced in a wedge formation, their axes and spears flashing in the dim light. Catapults rumbled, sending boulders crashing into the fortress's walls, while fire arrows lit the night with bursts of golden flame. But the defenders were no mere mortals. From the battlements, spectral figures emerged, warriors of the dead, their forms shifting between flesh and bone, their eyes hollow voids that drank the light. They moved with unnatural speed, their weapons dripping with the ichor of the underworld. Lysandra's breath came in sharp gasps as she drove her spear into the chest of one of the spectral warriors, its blade glowing with the light of Athena's blessing. But the creature did not fall. Instead, it laughed a sound like cracking ice and lunged at her, its fingers curling into claws. Jorund was there in an instant, his axe cleaving through the entity's form, but the wound healed as quickly as it was made. "This is no ordinary battle," Lysandra panted, her grip tightening on her weapon. "They are not of this world." Jorund's jaw was set, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Then we fight like the gods themselves." But the gods had already begun their work. From the shadows of the siege lines, Loki's influence seeped into the warband like a poison. Illusions twisted the air, making the fortress's walls shift and stretch, turning solid stone into mirages of endless corridors. Warriors who had fought side by side turned on each other, their minds ensnared by the trickster's whispers. "Betrayal is the only truth," a voice hissed in Jorund's ear, and he turned to see one of his own men raising a blade against him. "Stop!" Lysandra's voice rang out, and with a single strike of her spear, she felled the traitor. But the damage was done. The warband's unity frayed, their trust eroded by the unseen hand of the gods. And then came the screams. From the fortress's inner courtyard, a new force emerged, warriors clad in blackened armor, their faces hidden beneath masks of bone. They moved in perfect unison, their steps silent, their weapons humming with the power of Hades himself. These were not the dead, but something else, agents of the underworld, their presence a reminder that the gods would not let the mortals claim the spear without a price. Jorund and Lysandra fought back to back, their blades a blur of steel and fire. Lysandra's spear struck true, its divine light carving through the spectral warriors, while Jorund's axe shattered the armor of the black-clad attackers. But for every enemy they felled, two more took their place. The fortress was a labyrinth of death, and the gods had made it their hunting ground. A sudden explosion of light split the air as a siege engine breached the gates, its massive ram smashing through the stone with a sound like the cracking of the world itself. The war band surged forward, their cries of triumph mingling with the screams of the fallen. But as the last of the defenders fell, the ground trembled, and the fortress's inner chamber groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense and decay. The walls were lined with ancient carvings, Norse runes, and Greek glyphs, intertwined, their meanings lost to time. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and upon it rested the spear. Its light pulsed like a heartbeat, its power undeniable. Jorund and Lysandra stepped forward, their hands reaching for the artifact. But before they could grasp it, a shadow moved. From the darkness, a figure emerged cloaked in the same black, armor as the spectral warriors, their face obscured by a mask of bone. Their voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of the cosmos. You have come far, but you are not the first to seek the spear. Lysandra's hand flew to her weapon, but the figure raised a hand, and the chamber erupted in chaos. The walls shuddered, the ground splitting open to reveal a chasm of endless night. The figure turned, their form dissolving into the shadows as the fortress's final defenses activated. The warband's cries of victory turned to panic as the gates of the fortress sealed behind them, the entrance collapsing in a cascade of stone and fire. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the heart of the chamber, the spear before them, but the true threat had already escaped. As the last of the spectral warriors fell, the chamber's lights dimmed, and the voice of the hidden enemy echoed through the air. The spear is not yours to claim, not yet. And with that, the fortress fell into silence. But the war was far from over, for in the shadows, the hidden enemy had vanished with a secret that would change the fate of the gods and mortals alike, and the final battle was only beginning. The fortress's inner chamber was silent, save for the crackle of dying fire and the distant echoes of the warband's triumph. Jorund and Lysandra stood before the spear, their hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what lay ahead. The air was thick with the scent of ash and something ancient, like the breath of a god. But the victory was short-lived. A low metallic clink echoed through the chamber. Jorund turned, his axe already in hand, but the figure who emerged from the shadows was not an enemy. It was Eric, a Skeld warrior, one of Jorund's most trusted men. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, but his grip on his sword was steady. "Should not have come here?" Eric said, his voice a whisper of thunder. Jorund's jaw tightened. "What are you talking about?" Eric stepped forward, his gaze flicking to the spear. "The gods have chosen their champions. You were never meant to wield it." Lysandra's hand flew to her spear, her expression hardening. "You were with us at the siege. You fought beside us. What has changed?" Eric's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Nothing. Everything." He raised his sword, the blade glinting with an unnatural light. "Ares has shown me the truth. The spear is not a weapon of unity, it is a catalyst. And you, Jorund, are the spark that will ignite Ragnarok." The words struck Jorund like a blow. He had heard the gods' whispers, felt their influence, but this was a betrayal of the deepest kind. Eric had been a brother in arms, a man who had stood at his side through blood and fire. And now he stood against him. "What have you done?" Jorund demanded, his voice low, dangerous. Eric's eyes darkened. "I have done what the gods asked. Ares has promised me power beyond the mortal realm. He has shown me the path to glory, to a world where the Skeld and Drakos are no more, and the gods' war is ended by fire and ash." Lysandra stepped forward, her spear trembling in her grip. "You think this is victory? You think Ares will let you live after he's used you?" Eric's laugh was cold, devoid of humanity. "And what of you, Drakos? You who carry the blood of Athena, who have danced with the gods' favor. Do you not see? The gods do not serve mortals. They use them." Jorund's mind raced. The siege, the hidden enemy, The whispers of Loki and Hades, it all pointed to a single truth. The war was not just a clash of clans or a battle for the spear. It was a game, and the gods had already chosen their pieces. But before he could speak, Eric moved. The strike was swift, a blur of steel and shadow. Jorund barely managed to parry, the impact sending a shock through his arm. Eric's blade was no ordinary weapon. It pulsed with the same dark energy that had plagued the fortress, its edge, humming with the power of Ares. "You were always the fool, Skeld," Eric spat, his breath ragged. "You thought love could mend what the gods have broken." Lysandra lunged, her spear striking true, but Eric twisted away, his movements unnaturally. "Fluid. You cannot stop what has already begun," he growled, his voice echoing with the weight of divine influence. "The spear will be mine, and when it is, the gods' war will end with your world in flames." Jorund's vision blurred, his heart pounding. He had faced countless enemies, but this was a wound deeper than any blade. Eric had not just betrayed him. He had shattered the very foundation of their alliance. But there was no time for grief. The chamber trembled, the runes on the walls flaring to life as if the fortress itself recoiled from the betrayal. A low, resonant hum filled the air, and from the shadows, a new presence emerged, the hidden enemy. The figure stepped into the light, their form cloaked in the same black armor as the spectral warriors, their mask of bone concealing their face. But this was no mere agent of Hades. This was Ares himself, his presence a storm of war and destruction. "You have done well, Eric," Ares said, his voice a rumble of thunder. "You have set the final piece in motion." Jorund's blood ran cold. "What are you planning?" Ares' gaze fell on the spear, his eyes gleaming with the fire of 1,000 battles. "To end the gods' war, you must first destroy the world. Ragnarok is not a prophecy, it is a choice. And I will see it fulfilled." Lysandra's hand tightened on her spear. "You would unleash the end of all things for your own gain?" Ares's laughter was a weapon of its own. "And what is the world but a stage for the gods? You mortals think you are the heroes of this tale, but you are only pawns. The spear is the key, and with it, I will open the gates of Valhalla and the underworld alike." Jorund's mind reeled. The gods had not merely manipulated the war, they had orchestrated it, using the clans, the betrayals, the bloodshed as fuel for their own cosmic ambitions. And now, with the spear in their grasp, they would bring about Ragnarok not as a warning, but as a victory. Eric stepped back, his expression one of grim satisfaction. "The gods have spoken. You cannot stop this." But Jorund would not let them. With a roar, he charged, his axe a blur of fury and desperation. The chamber erupted into chaos, the clash of steel and divine power shaking the very foundations of the fortress. And as the battle raged, the hidden enemy's final words echoed through the air, a promise of destruction that would not be undone. "World will burn, and when it does, the gods will reign." The final battle had begun, and the fate of mortals and immortals alike hung by a thread. The warband's camp was a sea of murmurs and shadow, the air thick with the scent of burning resin and the weight of unspoken dread. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of the firelight, their faces etched with exhaustion, their hands still, stained with the blood of battle. The fortress had fallen, but the victory felt hollow. The spear remained hidden, its power a promise and a curse. and the gods' whispers lingered in the wind like the breath of a dying star. It was Freya Melantha, who called them to the sacred grove, her presence as enigmatic as the storm that had brought them to the island. The seeress moved like a specter, her silver hair tangled with ivy and the ash of her visions, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. She had not spoken since the siege, her silence a weight upon the warband. But now, as the moon cast its pale light over the ruins, she raised her hands and spoke. The gods do not reveal their truths in words, she intoned, her voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. They weave them in shadows, in dreams, in the blood of the chosen. Jorund stepped forward, his axe resting against his shoulder. What do you see, seer? Freya's gaze met his, and for a moment, he felt as though she were peering into the marrow of his bones. I see a path that splits into two, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of what she carried. One leads to salvation, the other to ruin. But the choice is not mine to make. Lysandra's breath caught. Then whose is it? Freya's lips curled into a sorrowful smile. The gods have sent their messengers, but their words are not one. Odin speaks of fate, of the Skeld's duty. Athena whispers of wisdom, of the Drakos' legacy. And between them, the gods' war rages, and you, her eyes flicked to Lysandra, carry the blood of both. Jorund's grip on Mjolnir tightened. What are you saying, Freya? That we are pawns in their game? I am saying that you are witnesses, she replied, her voice rising. The gods do not act without purpose. They have chosen you to bear their burden, but the cost is not for the weak. A sudden gust of wind howled through the grove, and the firelight dimmed, casting the camp in a shroud of darkness. Freya's body shuddered, her hands trembling as if gripped by an unseen force. The vision comes, she whispered. Truth is not kind. The ground beneath them trembled, and the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of iron and incense. The fire flared, its flames twisting into shapes that defied the natural world serpents, coiling around broken thrones, stars collapsing into the void, and a figure standing at the center of it all. Jorund and Lysandra, their hands clasped around the spear, their faces etched with both triumph and despair. Then the vision shifted. The spear's light flared, and the world around them burned. The Skeld and Drakos clans lay in ruins, their warriors scattered like ash on the wind. The sky split open, and from its fissures poured the gods Odin, Athena, Hades, Ares, each wielding their own fury, their eyes fixed on the mortals below. And at the heart of it all, Jorund and Lysandra stood, their bodies broken, their blood cooling on the earth, the spear lying forgotten at their feet. Freya gasped, her hands clutching her chest as if the vision had torn through her soul. The price of love, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It is not victory, it is sacrifice. Lysandra staggered back, her spear slipping from her grasp. No, she breathed, her voice raw. This cannot be. This is not what we fought for. Jorund's jaw was set, his eyes locked on the seeress. What does it mean? Freya's gaze was distant, as though she were staring into the depths of time itself. The gods demand a choice. To wield the spear is to awaken the final war. To let it fall is to let the world burn. But there is another path, one that requires a sacrifice beyond blood. A bond that must be broken. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Jorund's heart pounded. A bond that must be broken. Lysandra turned to him, her eyes wide with realization. You don't think it's us? He hesitated, the weight of the prophecy pressing down on him. If the gods demand a sacrifice to end their war, what if it is our love that is the price? The fire crackled, its light dimming as if the very world were holding its breath. Freya's voice was a whisper now, a final warning. The gods do not speak in mercy, they speak in inevitability. And the path you walk is not one of glory, but of cost. Jorund and Lysandra stood in silence, the truth of the oracles, words settling over them like a shroud. The war was no longer just a battle for the spear. It was a battle for their very souls. And as the wind howled through the grove, carrying with it the echoes of the gods' voices, a single question lingered, in the air, unspoken but undeniable. What would they be willing to give up to stop the end of the world? The answer, they knew, would shape the fate of mortals and immortals alike. But for now, the vision remained a warning, a prophecy, a choice that could not be undone. And the gods were watching. The moon hung low over the island, its pale light casting long shadows across the war-band's encampment. The air was thick with the scent of burning pine and the weight of unspoken words. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of a sacred grove, their cloaks heavy with the chill of the night, their hands trembling not from fear, but from the enormity of what they were about to do. The war had reached a breaking point. The clans, fractured by divine manipulation and mortal betrayal, teetered on the brink of collapse. The gods' whispers still echoed in their minds Odin's demand for duty, Athena's promise of wisdom, Ares' hunger for destruction. But beneath it all, a single truth remained. The spear must be claimed, or the world would burn. Freya Melantha had spoken of a path, but it was not one of conquest. It was a pact of fragile truce between the Skeld and Drakos, brokered not by swords, but by words. And so, under the veil of darkness, Jorund and Lysandra met in secret, their hearts heavy with the burden of what lay ahead. The gods will not let this stand, Lysandra said, her voice a whisper against the wind. She stood at the edge of a stone circle, its surface etched with runes that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. Ares will not allow us to unite. Neither will Odin. Jorund's grip tightened on Malnira. Then we must act before they decide for us. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to vanish. We have fought for our clans, for our people. But this is for all of us. Lysandra's lips parted, but no words came. She had spent her life bound by the legacy of the Drakos, by the blood of Athena that coursed through her veins. And yet, here she was, standing beside a man who had once been her enemy. A sudden gust of wind howled through the grove, and the runes on the stone circle flared to life. The air shimmered, and from the shadows, two figures emerged, Odin and Athena, their forms wreathed in the light of their respective realms. Odin's one eye burned with the fire of prophecy. You dare to seek peace, mortals? His voice was a storm, his presence a force that pressed against the very fabric of the world. The gods do not bargain, they command. Athena stepped forward, her golden armor gleaming like the dawn. But you do, Jorund Skeldrson. You carry the blood of the Skeld and Lysandra Drakos, the blood of the gods. You are the bridge between worlds. Her gaze was piercing. Will you build it, or let the gods tear it down? Jorund's heart pounded. He could feel the weight of the gods will pressing down on him, their demands a chain around his soul. But he had seen what the gods' war had done, blood on the sand, lives lost, the earth itself trembling beneath their fury. "I will not let this end in fire," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within him. "If the gods will not listen, then I will make them." Athena's expression softened, but Odin's remained cold. "A bold declaration, but one that will cost you everything." Before Jorund could respond, the ground trembled. The runes on the stone circle flared, and the air grew thick with the scent of iron and incense. A new voice rose, low and insidious, carrying the weight of something ancient. "You think this is a truce, mortals? You are fools." The shadows at the edge of the grove shifted, and from their depths emerged a figure cloaked in the same black armor as the spectral warriors, their face obscured by a mask of bone. It was the hidden enemy, the one who had escaped the fortress with a deadly secret. Eric, his eyes, now glowing with the dark fire of Ares, locked onto Jorund. "You think you can end the gods' war with a pact?" He sneered, his voice a blade of ice. "You are nothing but pawns, and pawns are meant to be sacrificed." Lysandra's hand flew to her spear, but Jorund raised a hand, his voice cutting through the tension. "What are you doing here, Eric?" Eric's laughter was a mockery of the night. "I am the truth of your so-called truce. You think the gods will let you walk away unscathed? They will not, and neither will I." With a single motion, he raised his sword, its edge humming with the power of Ares. The air crackled as the ground beneath them split open, revealing a chasm of endless darkness. "Your pact is broken," Eric hissed, "and the gods will see your world burn." Before Jorund could react, the ground gave way. The grove erupted into chaos as the hidden enemy's forces surged from the shadows, their weapons gleaming with the light of the underworld. The war had begun again. And as the first clash of steel rang out, Jorund and Lysandra stood at the heart of the storm, their fragile truce shattered, their fate once more in the hands of the gods. But even as the battle raged, a single question lingered. In the air, unspoken but undeniable. Had the gods ever intended for peace to last? The night was alive with the sound of howls deep, guttural cries that echoed through the island's forests, like the breath of a sleeping giant. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of the warband's camp, their weapons drawn, their senses sharpened by the unnatural stillness that had fallen over the land. The air was thick with the scent of blood and ash, the remnants of the truce's collapse still smoldering in the distance. But this was no ordinary threat. Fenrir's kin had come. The first of them emerged from the trees, a monstrous creature, its body a grotesque fusion of wolf and nightmare, its fur black as the void, and its eyes burning with the fire of the underworld. Its claws raked the earth as it moved, leaving deep scars in the soil, and its jaws snapped with a sound like breaking bone. Behind it, more figures followed, twisted, feral, their forms shifting between flesh and shadow, as if the very fabric of the world had been torn open to let them through. "They're not just beasts," Lysandra whispered, her spear trembling in her grip. "They're alive with the god's will." Jorund's jaw tightened. Loki's children. He sent them to hunt us. The warband surged forward, their axes and spears flashing in the moonlight as they met the onslaught. The creatures moved with terrifying speed, their bodies a blur of fangs and claws, their howls echoing through the trees. Jorund's axe found its mark, cleaving through one of the beasts, but the wound healed as quickly as it was made, the creature's form shifting like smoke. "They're not of this world," a Skeld warrior shouted, his voice laced with desperation. "They can't be killed." Lysandra's gaze flicked to Jorund, her expression grim. "Then we don't fight them the way we fight mortals." But before she could act, a new sound split the air a low, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the earth itself. From the shadows of the forest, a massive figure emerged, its form towering over the others. It was a beast unlike the rest, its body covered in bristling fur, its eyes glowing with the cold fire of the underworld. Its snarls were not of pain, but of purpose. "This is not a hunt," Lysandra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a test." Jorund's grip on Mjolnir tightened. "Then we must survive it." The battle raged, the war band fighting with desperate fury, their weapons clashing against the creature's unyielding forms. But for every beast they felled, two more took its place, their numbers endless, their hunger insatiable. The gods had unleashed a force beyond mortal comprehension, and the war band was caught in the maw of a nightmare dot. As the chaos reached its peak, a cry rang out from the edge of the battlefield. "Here, this way." Jorund turned to see a Drakos warrior, dragging a wounded figure toward the camp. It was a beast, its body mangled, its limbs twisted, its breath ragged. But what struck Jorund most was the look in its eyes, not of mindless rage, but of recognition. "This one's still alive," the warrior said, his voice hoarse. "It's different from the others." Lysandra knelt beside the creature, her hands trembling as she reached out. The beast recoiled, its fangs bared, but then it stilled, its gaze locking onto hers. A strange calm settled over the battlefield, the other creatures pausing as if sensing something. "What is it?" Jorund asked, his voice low. Lysandra's breath caught. "It's not just a beast. It's bound to the gods." The creature's eyes flickered, and for a moment, the air around them shimmered. A voice, deep and ancient, echoed in there. "Minds, you seek the truth, mortals, but the gods do not reveal it freely." The war band fell silent, the creatures stilling as if awaiting a command. Lysandra's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" The beast's gaze shifted, its form flickering between the monstrous and the human. "The spear, it is not what you think. It is a key, and the gods do not wish for it to be used." Jorund's mind reeled. "Why?" The beast's eyes burned with a mixture of pain and knowledge. "Because it is not a weapon. It is a binding. To wield it is to unleash the final war. To destroy it is to end the god's cycle." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of prophecy. Lysandra's hand trembled. "Then why did the gods send us here?" The beast's form shuddered, its voice a whisper of wind and sorrow. "Because they do not know. They have forgotten. And you are the only ones who can remember." Before Jorund could speak, the battlefield erupted once more. The other creatures lunged, their howls a storm of fury. But this time, the war band did not fight with fear. They fought with purpose. And as the last of the beasts fell, the captured creature's eyes met Jorund's one final time. The gods are not the only ones who have forgotten. Then, with a final, shuddering breath, it collapsed into the earth, its form dissolving into the shadows. The warband stood in silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them like a shroud. But even as the battle ended, a new threat loomed on the horizon, and the gods were watching. The forest was silent. Not the peaceful hush of a sleeping world, but the eerie stillness of something vast and waiting, its breath held in anticipation of the storm to come. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of a clearing, their weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the darkness for the creature that had haunted their dreams. The air was thick with the scent of iron, and something older, something primal, like the breath of a god. The Minotaur had not come as a beast, but as a shadow, a towering figure of muscle and sinew, its form a grotesque fusion of man and bull, its eyes glowing with the fire of the underworld. Its horns, jagged and blackened, curved like the blades of 1,000 forgotten wars, and its breath came in ragged, thunderous gasps, shaking the earth beneath their feet. But it was not the creature itself that unsettled them. It was the way. It moved, as if the very fabric of the world had been twisted to accommodate its presence. Athena's voice echoed in their minds, not as a whisper, but as a command. This is the final trial, mortals. The Minotaur's shadow is not a monster. It is the reflection of your own fears. Confront it, or be consumed by it. Lysandra's hand trembled as she gripped her spear. This isn't just a test, she murmured. It's a mirror. Jorund's jaw tightened. Then we face it. The Minotaur roared, a sound that split the sky and sent the trees trembling. Its massive body lunged forward, its claws raking the earth as it charged. Jorund met it head on, his axe flashing in the dim light, but the creature's hide was impenetrable, its strikes sending shockwaves through the ground. Lysandra moved to his side, her spear striking true, but the Minotaur's flesh healed as quickly as it was wounded, its form shifting like smoke. We can't kill it, she panted, her breath ragged. It's not of this world. Jorund's eyes narrowed. And we don't fight it like a beast. We fight it like a god. The Minotaur's gaze locked onto them, its eyes burning with a mixture of rage and something else, recognition. It slowed, its massive form swaying as if caught between two realities. And then the ground beneath them cracked, and the clearing was no longer a forest, but a labyrinth of stone and shadow. The Minotaur's form shifted, its body becoming a blur of movement, its voice a growl that resonated in their bones. You seek the spear, but you do not understand its cost. Lysandra's breath caught. What are you? The creature's eyes gleamed. I am the price of the gods' war, the consequence of their meddling. You think you fight for your clans, for your love, but you are only pawns in a game older than time. Jorund's grip on Mjolnir tightened. Then why show yourself to us? The Minotaur's form flickered, its voice a whisper now. Because you are the only ones who remember, the only ones who can break the cycle. The word struck Jorund like a blow. He had always believed the gods were distant, their will a force beyond mortal comprehension. But this was something different. The Minotaur was not just a creature of myth. It was a wound in the world, a scar left by the gods' endless conflict. And it was testing them. Lysandra stepped forward, her spear trembling in her grasp. What do you mean? Break the cycle? The Minotaur's form wavered, its massive body flickering between solid and shadow. The spear is not a weapon. It is a key to the gods' prison. To wield it is to open the gates of Ragnarok. To destroy it is to end the war. But at a cost, Jorund's heart pounded. What cost? The Minotaur's eyes burned with a terrible light. The price of unity, the price of love, the price of you. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Lysandra's breath caught. "You mean our sacrifice?" The Minotaur's form shuddered, its voice low, mournful rumble. "Not all who seek to end the gods' war survive. Some are consumed by it, and some are forgotten." The clearing trembled, the ground splitting open as if the earth itself were recoiling from the truth. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of a chasm, the Minotaur's shadow stretching behind them like a living thing. The weight of the revelation pressed down on them, their bond tested by the enormity of what they had learned. Lysandra's voice was barely a whisper. "If the spear is a key, then what happens if we use it?" The Minotaur's form flickered, its voice a final warning. "The gods will not allow it. They will come for you. And when they do, you will have to choose between your people, your love, and the fate of the world." The ground beneath them gave way, and the clearing dissolved into darkness as the last echoes of the Minotaur's voice faded. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the edge of a new reality. The spear's true power had been revealed, but so had the price of wielding it. And in the shadows, the gods watched. The final choice is near, a voice intoned, neither mortal nor divine, and the world will not survive the cost. The cliffhanger left them standing at the precipice of destiny, the weight of the gods' war pressing down on their souls. The spear was no longer just a weapon. It was a burden, a promise, a curse. And the final battle was no longer a question of if it would come, but when. The world had changed, and the gods had already chosen their next move. The warband's camp was a graveyard of broken oaths and shattered hopes. Smoke curled from the remnants of their fires, the air thick with the scent of ash and the metallic tang of blood. Jorund stood at the edge of the encampment, his hands gripping the hilt of Mjolnir, so tightly his knuckles had turned white. The shield he had once carried, a relic of the Skeld clan, its surface etched with the runes of their ancestors, lay in pieces at his feet, its edges jagged, its sacred symbols cracked beyond repair. It had been his father's, his grandfather's, a symbol of the clan's unbroken honor. Now it was nothing but ruin. Odin's wrath had come swiftly. The storm that had followed the failed truce was no mere tempest. It was a divine punishment, a reckoning for the broken oaths that had fractured the clans. The sky churned with lightning, its bolts striking the earth with a fury that left the land scorched and the warriors trembling. The gods had not forgiven the Skeld and Drakos for their defiance, nor for the betrayal that had torn their alliance apart. Lysandra approached, her steps slow, her gaze heavy with the weight of what they had lost. "The gods have taken everything," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Our people, our strength, our hope." Jorund turned to her, his eyes burning with a mix of grief and fury. "They took us," he said, his voice low, edged with pain. "They took the shield, the oaths, the very thing that bound us to our purpose. And they did it because we dared to choose love over duty." Lysandra's breath hitched. "You think this is about love?" "I think it's about honor," he snapped, his grip on Mjolnir tightening. "The gods don't care about our choices. They only care about their own games. And now they've cast us aside." She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. But he pulled away. "You don't understand," he continued, his voice breaking. "I believed in the Skeld's code. I believed in the gods' will. But this is not their will. This is their wrath." A sudden tremor shook the earth, and the air grew thick with the scent of iron and decay. From the shadows of the camp, figures emerged, warriors of the Skeld and Drakos, their faces etched with desperation. Some had lost their weapons, their armor dented, their bodies bearing the scars of divine punishment. Others had lost more, their brothers, their kin, their very sense of purpose. One of the Skeld warriors, a man named Einar, stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "The gods have cursed us, Jorund. Our oaths are broken. Our strength is gone. What are we to do?" Jorund's jaw tightened. "We fight." Einar's laugh was bitter. "And what will that accomplish? The gods have already won." Lysandra's gaze flicked to Jorund, her expression unreadable. "Maybe they have," she said, her voice quiet. "But that doesn't mean we stop." The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of defiance against the weight of the gods' judgment. But even as she spoke, the ground beneath them shuddered, and the sky split open with a deafening roar. A figure descended from the clouds, a towering form of shadow and flame, its eyes burning with the fire of Odin himself. "You have defied the gods." The voice boomed, a thunderous echo that sent shivers through the warband. "And for that, you will pay the price." Jorund's heart pounded. "What price?" The figure's form shifted, its features coalescing into the image of a warrior clad in blackened armor, its face obscured by a mask of bone. "The price of your broken oaths," it said, its voice a whisper of wind and death. "The price of your love." Lysandra stepped forward, her spear trembling in her grip. "You speak of love as if it is a weakness." The figure's laughter was a storm. "Love is the greatest weakness of all. It blinds mortals to the truth of their fates." Jorund's blood ran cold. "What truth?" The figure's gaze locked onto him, its voice a low, insidious murmur. "That the gods do not need your love. They need your sacrifice. And you, Jorund Skeldrson, will be the one to give it." A new tremor rocked the earth, and the warband's camp erupted into chaos. The sky darkened, the stars fading as if the gods themselves had turned their backs on the world. The broken shield at Jorund's feet flared with a sickly light, its runes flickering as if in pain. Lysandra's hand found his, her fingers trembling. "We can't let them take you." Jorund's eyes met hers, and for the first time, he saw the fear in her gaze. "I don't know what they want," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know this. I won't let them break." The figure's voice returned, a final warning. "Then you will be broken." As the warband scrambled to defend themselves, Jorund and Lysandra stood at the center of the storm, their bond the only thing anchoring them. The gods had taken their oaths, their strength, their hope, but they had not taken their choice. And in the shadows, a plan began to form, a desperate, dangerous gambit to reclaim their honor, to defy the gods' will, and to face the final battle that awaited them. But as the sky split open and the ground trembled, one question lingered, unspoken but undeniable. Could they survive what came next? The answer would determine not just their fates, but the fate of the world itself. The gods were waiting. The island's heart was a place of ancient power, where the earth itself pulsed with the echoes of gods and mortals. The warband's final siege began at dawn, the sky a bruise of storm clouds, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from the coming clash. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the forefront, their forces gathered in a desperate alliance, Skeld warriors, Drakos warriors, and those who had defied the gods' will, all bound by a single purpose: to claim the spear and end it. War. The fortress that guarded the artifact was no mere structure of stone and wood. It was a relic of the gods, its walls etched with runes that shimmered with the light of forgotten ages. At its center, a massive stone dais rose, its surface cracked and blackened, as if the earth had been scarred by divine fury. The spear lay, buried beneath it, its power a whisper in the air, a force that made the very ground tremble. But the gods would not let the mortals claim it without a fight. Odin's storm descended first, a tempest of lightning and wind that tore through the warband's ranks. His ravens circled overhead, their cries a warning, while his own form emerged from the storm, a towering figure of shadow and flame, his one eye blazing with the knowledge of all things. You dare to defy the will of the gods? He thundered, his voice a storm in itself. This is not your fate, Skeld. This is not your path. Athena answered from the other side of the battlefield, her golden armor gleaming in the dim light. And yet, you have no right to decide their fate, she countered, her voice a calm against the chaos. The mortals have chosen their own path, and I will not let you destroy them. The war band surged forward, their axes and spears flashing, as they clashed with the divine champions. Jorund and Lysandra fought side by side, their bond a beacon of defiance. Mjolnir and her spear clashed against the forces of the gods, their strikes a testament to the love that had united their clans. But the gods were not content to watch. Ares, the god of war, descended from the skies, his presence a storm of blood and fury. You think you can wield the spear? He sneered, his voice a blade of ice. It is not a weapon for mortals. It is a weapon for gods. His warriors, clad in blackened armor, surged forward, their weapons dripping with the ichor of the underworld. Hades himself emerged from the shadows, his form a void that swallowed the light. The mortals will pay the price for their arrogance. He intoned, his voice a whisper of death. And I will see it done. The battlefield became a maelstrom of chaos. The war band fought with desperate fury, their bodies battered, their spirits unbroken. Jorund and Lysandra led the charge, their love a rallying cry that drove their people forward. But the gods were relentless, their power a force that threatened to crush the mortals beneath their will. As the war band reached the dais, the ground beneath them trembled. The runes on the stone flared to life, their light a warning. The spear was close, so close that Jorund could feel its power, a force that resonated in his very bones. But as he reached for it, the earth split open, and a figure emerged from the depths. It was the hidden enemy, the one who had escaped the fortress with a deadly secret. Eric, his face twisted with the dark fire of Ares, stood before them, his sword raised. You think you can claim it? He snarled. The gods have already chosen. The spear will be mine. Jorund's grip tightened on Mjolnir. You are not the one who will wield it. Eric's laughter was a mockery of the night. Then you will die trying. The clash was swift, a blur of steel and fury. But even as Jorund fought, the ground beneath them gave way. The dais cracked, and the spear was unearthed, its shaft gleaming with a light that seemed to come from within. But as it rose from the earth, the air crackled with energy, the power of the gods surging through it. The spear was no longer a relic of the past. It was alive, its power unstable, its will a force that could not be tamed. And as the warband gazed upon it, a final truth became clear. The gods had not come to stop the mortals. They had come to claim the spear for themselves. The final battle had begun. But as the spear's light flared, the earth itself seemed to shudder, and a voice deep, ancient, and filled with the weight of the cosmos boomed through the battlefield. The world will burn, and the gods will decide its fate. The cliffhanger left the warband standing at the edge of destiny, the spear's unstable power, a force that could either end the gods' war or unleash a new age of destruction. And the gods were waiting. The battlefield was no longer just a clash of steel and blood. It was a war of wills, a contest between mortals and the gods who had long manipulated their fates. The spear, now fully unearthed, pulsed with a light that seemed to defy the laws of the natural world. Its power was undeniable, but so was its instability, a force that threatened to unravel the very fabric of existence. Odin and Athena stood at the heart of the storm, their forms towering over the warband, their presence a storm of divine authority. The sky above them split open, revealing the vast, endless expanse of the cosmos, where stars blinked like the eyes of ancient gods. The gods had no need for words. Their will was written in the trembling earth, the howling wind, and the flickering shadows of their champions. You have played your part, mortals. Odin intoned, his voice a thunderous echo that sent shivers through the warband. But the game is not yours to win. Athena's golden armor gleamed as she stepped forward, her gaze sharp as a blade. You were never meant to wield the spear, she said, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom and sorrow. It is not a weapon of war, nor a tool of peace. It is a key to the gods' prison. And you, Jorund Skeldrson, Lysandra Drakos, are the only ones who can decide its fate. Jorund's grip on Mjolnir tightened, his breath ragged. Then why have you let us suffer? Why have you guided us here, only to take it from us? Odin's one eye burned with the fire of prophecy. Because the mortals are the pieces in this game. You fight for your clans, your love, your survival. But the gods do not play for victory. We play to end the war. Athena's expression softened, though her voice remained firm. The gods' war has raged for eons. The spear is the only thing that can stop it. But to wield it is to bear the burden of its power. To destroy it is to end the war, but at a cost. Lysandra's hand trembled as she reached for the spear, her spear trembling in her grasp. What cost? The gods did not answer. Instead, the ground beneath them cracked, and from the depths of the earth, a new figure emerged, a warrior clad in the same blackened armor as the hidden enemy, his face obscured by a mask of bone. It was Eric, but he was no longer the man Jorund had once called a brother. His eyes burned with the fire of Ares, his voice a whisper of betrayal. You think the gods are the only ones who play this game? He sneered, his blade raised. You are fools. The gods have always been the pawns. And now, I will be the one to take the crown. The war band surged forward, but Jorund and Lysandra stood frozen, their hearts pounding. The betrayal was not just a blow to their forces, it was a revelation. The gods had not merely manipulated the war. They had orchestrated it, using the mortals as tools in their own cosmic struggle. And now, the final move was about to be made. The spear is not yours to claim. Odin said, his voice a storm. It belongs to the gods. And if you stand in our way, we will crush you. And if you destroy it, Athena added, her voice a whisper of warning, the gods will not survive the war. Jorund's mind reeled. The gods had always spoken in riddles, their will a force beyond mortal comprehension. But now, the truth was clear. The spear was not a weapon of salvation or destruction. It was a choice. And the mortals had been forced to make it. Lysandra's voice was barely a whisper. "What do you want us to do?" Odin's gaze locked onto her, his voice a low, resonant hum. "Choose, Lysandra. Choose your people, or choose the gods. But know this, no matter your choice, the world will not survive the cost." Jorund turned to her, his heart a battlefield of its own. He had spent his life fighting for his clan, for the honor of the Skeld. But now, standing at the edge of destiny, he saw the truth. The war was not just a battle for the spear. It was a battle for love, for fate, for the very soul of the world. "We cannot let the gods decide our fate," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within him. "If the spear is a key, then we must be the ones to turn it." Lysandra's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The weight of their bond, the sacrifices they had made, the love that had defied the gods' will, all of it was reflected in her gaze. "Then we must be the ones to break the cycle," she whispered. But before they could act, the ground beneath them trembled, and the air crackled with energy. Eric's blade flashed, and the warband erupted into chaos. The betrayal was no longer a threat, it was a weapon. And as the final battle began, the gods watched, their eyes fixed on the mortals who had dared to challenge their will. "The game is over," Odin's voice boomed, "and the pieces are falling." The cliffhanger left the warband at the precipice of destiny, the spear's unstable power a force that could either end the gods' war or unleash a new age of destruction. And as the betrayal threatened to tip the balance, the question remained, would the mortals survive the gods' final move? The answer would shape the fate of the world, and the gods were waiting. The sky burned, not with the fire of a mortal conflagration, but with the wrath of the gods themselves. The stars above were no longer distant points of light, but eyes watching the world's final hour. The earth trembled as if the very bones of the world had been shaken loose, and the air crackled with the energy of forces beyond mortal comprehension. Ragnarok had not come as a single event. It had arrived as a slow, inevitable unraveling, a reckoning that had been written in the As, blood of the first gods and the dreams of the last mortals. Odin stood at the edge of the battlefield, his form wreathed in the storm of his own making. The ravens on his shoulders had grown silent, their wings still, their eyes fixed on the warband below. His one eye burned with the knowledge of all things, but there was no triumph in it, only the weight of inevitability. "The end is near," he intoned, his voice a thunderclap that split the air. "The gods' war has reached its final act, and you, mortals, are the last pieces on the board." Athena stood opposite him, her golden armor gleaming even in the dim light of the dying world. Her gaze was sharp, her expression unreadable, but her hands trembled as she clutched the hem of her cloak. "This is not the end," she said, her voice a whisper of defiance. "It is the beginning of something new. But you must choose, Jorund Skeldrson. You must choose now." The spear lay at the heart of the battlefield, its shaft pulsing with a light that seemed to defy the laws of the cosmos. It was no longer just a relic of the gods. It was a force of will, a bridge between the mortal and divine, and its power was no longer stable. The runes etched into its surface flared and faded, as if the artifact itself was struggling to decide its own fate. Jorund and Lysandra stood before it, their bodies battered, their spirits frayed. The war band had been shattered, their numbers dwindling as the god's fury consumed them. The betrayal by Eric had left wounds that could not be healed, and the weight of the god's will pressed down on them like a storm that would not break. Love or duty? Lysandra whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. She reached for Jorund's hand, her fingers trembling. What do we choose? Jorund's grip on Mjolnir was steady, but his heart was a battlefield. He had spent his life fighting. For the Skeld, for the honor of his clan, for the oaths that had bound him to the god's will. But now, as the world burned, he saw the truth. The gods had never been allies. They had been manipulators, weaving the fates of mortals like threads in a tapestry they would never understand. Love, he said, his voice low but resolute. It's all we have left. Lysandra's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. Then we must take the spear, she said, her voice firm. We must decide its fate. But the gods would not allow it. Odin raised his hand, and the sky split open with a deafening roar. From the void, a torrent of lightning surged downward, striking the battlefield with the force of 1,000 storms. The war band fell to their knees, their weapons shattered, their bodies broken. The gods had come for the final move. Athena's voice was a whisper of wind and sorrow. You cannot stop this, Jorund. The gods will not let you. They will not let anyone. Jorund's gaze locked onto the spear, its light flickering like a dying star. He could feel its power, its promise, its danger. To wield it was to become a god. To destroy it was to end the war, but at what cost? Lysandra stepped forward, her spear trembling in her grasp. We are not your pawns, she said, her voice rising above the storm. We are not your tools. We are mortal, and we choose our fate. Odin's eyes burned with fury. You dare to defy the gods? Athena's expression softened, but her voice was still sharp. You have already done so, Lysandra. You have chosen love over duty. Now you must choose your path. The spear pulsed, its light flaring as if in response to their words. The ground beneath them cracked, and the air grew thick with the scent of incense and blood. The gods' war had reached its peak, and the final choice was upon them. Jorund turned to Lysandra, his heart pounding. What do you think? She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. I think we have to trust each other. The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in the face of the gods' fury. But before they could act, the battlefield erupted. Eric, his blade raised, charged toward them, his form a blur of shadow and fire. Love is a weakness, he snarled, his voice a weapon of its own, and you will pay for it. Jorund's axe met his in a clash of steel and fury, but the battle was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the soul of the world. As the final battle raged, the spear's light flared, and the gods' voices echoed through the storm. Choose mortals. The world will not survive the cost. And as the last echoes of their choices rang through the battlefield, the twilight of the gods began. The final choice was made, but the price had yet to be paid. The battlefield was a maelstrom of fire, steel, and divine fury. The sky, once a canvas of stars, had been torn asunder, its light swallowed by the shadows of the gods' wrath. The earth itself seemed to scream as the war band fought to hold the line. Their bodies battered, their spirits frayed, but their resolve unbroken. Jorund and Lysandra stood at the heart of the storm, their forms a beacon of defiance against the chaos. Odin's storm raged above, a tempest of lightning and wind that shattered the warband's defenses. His ravens circled like vultures, there, cries a cacophony of death and judgment. Below, his form loomed a towering figure of shadow and flame, his one eye burning with the weight of eternity. "You cannot stop this, mortals," he thundered, his voice a storm that shook the very bones of the world. "The gods' war is not yours to end." Athena, her golden armor gleaming even in the darkness, stood opposite him, her presence a counterpoint to his fury. "But it is your choice," she countered, her voice a whisper of wind and sorrow. "You have fought for your people, for your love. Now, you must choose your path." The spear, now fully unearthed, pulsed with a light that defied the laws of the cosmos. Its power was no longer stable. It was a force of will, a bridge between the mortal and divine, and its presence had turned the battlefield into a crucible of fate. Jorund and Lysandra stood before it, their hands trembling, their hearts pounding. "Love or duty?" Lysandra whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. She reached for Jorund's hand, her fingers trembling. "What do we choose?" Jorund's grip on Laura was steady, but his heart was a battlefield. He had spent his life fighting for the Skeld, for the honor of his clan, for the oaths that had bound him to the gods' will. But now, as the world burned, he saw the truth. The gods had never been allies. They had been manipulators, weaving the fates of mortals like threads in a tapestry they would never understand. "Love," he said, his voice low but resolute. "It's all we have left." Lysandra's eyes filled with tears, but she did not. "Let them fall. Then we must take the spear," she said, her voice firm. "We must decide its fate." But the gods would not allow it. Odin raised his hand, and the sky split open with a deafening roar. From the void, a torrent of lightning surged downward, striking the battlefield with the force of 1,000 storms. The warband fell to their knees, their weapons shattered, their bodies broken. The gods had come for the final move. Athena's voice was a whisper of wind and sorrow. "You cannot stop this, Jorund. The gods will not let you. They will not let anyone." Jorund's gaze locked onto the spear, its light flickering like a dying star. He could feel its power, its promise, its danger. To wield it was to become a god. To destroy it was to end the war, but at what cost? Lysandra stepped forward, her spear trembling in her grasp. "We are not your pawns," she said, her voice rising above the storm. "We are not your tools. We are mortal, and we choose our fate." Odin's eyes burned with fury. "You dare to defy the gods?" Athena's expression softened, but her voice was still sharp. "You have already done so, Lysandra. You have chosen love over duty. Now you must choose your path." The spear pulsed, its light flaring as if in response to their words. The ground beneath them cracked, and the air grew thick with the scent of incense and blood. The gods' war had reached its peak, and the final choice was upon them. Jorund turned to Lysandra, his heart pounding. "What do you think?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "I think we have to trust each other." The words hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope in the face of the gods' fury. But before they could act, the battlefield erupted. Eric, his blade raised, charged toward them, his form a blur of shadow and fire. "Love is a weakness," he snarled, his voice a weapon of its own. "And you will pay for it." Jorund's axe met his in a clash of steel and fury, but the battle was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the soul of the world. As the final battle raged, the spear's light flared, and the gods' voices echoed through the storm. "Choose mortals. The world will not survive the cost." And as the last echoes of their choices rang through the battlefield, the twilight of the gods began. The final choice was made, but the price had yet to be paid. The spear's light flared, its glow piercing the storm-torn sky like a dying star. Jorund Skeldrson stood before it, his body trembling, his soul a battlefield of fire and shadow. The gods' voices had fallen silent, their divine fury momentarily stilled by the weight of what he was about to do. Around him, the war band fell to their knees, their weapons shattered, their spirits broken. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath, as if the very fabric of the world awaited the final act of a story written in blood and fate. Odin's storm had ceased, the lightning retreating into the void. Athena's golden armor gleamed in the dim light, her gaze fixed on Jorund, her expression a mixture of sorrow and reverence. "You would bind your soul to the spear?" she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of ages. "You would become its vessel, its burden?" Jorund's grip on Mjolnir tightened, his knuckles white. "I would," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "For my people, for Lysandra, for the world." Athena's eyes flickered with something like pity. The gods do not grant such power freely. To wield the spear is to become its master or its prisoner. Odin's form loomed behind her, his one eye burning with the fire of prophecy. "And what will you gain, Skeld? A god's strength? A god's curse?" Jorund turned to Lysandra, his heart aching with the weight of the moment. She stood at the edge of the battlefield, her spear trembling in her grasp, her eyes filled with tears that she would not let fall. "I cannot live without you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I cannot let the gods destroy us either." He reached for her, his fingers brushing hers, and for a fleeting instant, the world seemed to still. The chaos of the battlefield, the screams of the fallen, the howling winds, all of it faded, leaving only the two of them, bound by a love that had defied the gods' will. "Then this is our choice," Jorund said, his voice low, resolute. "Not for the gods, not for the clans, but for us." With a final shuddering breath, he raised the spear. Its light flared, its power surging through him like a tidal wave, searing his flesh, unraveling his soul. The runes on its surface pulsed in time with his heartbeat, their ancient magic weaving through his veins, binding him to the artifact's will. The ground beneath him cracked, and the air grew thick with the scent of ash and incense. Lysandra's scream echoed through the battlefield, but Jorund did not look away. He felt the pain, the fire, the weight of the gods' power pressing down on him. But he did not falter. He had made his choice. Athena stepped forward, her golden armor glinting in the dim light. "No mortal should bear such a burden," she said, her voice a whisper of wind and sorrow. "But if this is your path, then let it be so." Odin's form wavered, his storm of fury dissipating into the void. "You have chosen a path that even the gods cannot undo," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum. "But know this, Skeld, your sacrifice will not go unanswered. The spear's light flared one final time, and the battlefield was consumed by a blinding radiance. The gods' voices faded, their forms dissolving into the ether, their war momentarily stilled by the mortals' defiance. The warband fell silent, their eyes fixed on the figure of Jorund, his body now a vessel of the spear's power, his form a beacon of both hope and sorrow. Lysandra fell to her knees, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Jorund," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread of grief. "Please, don't leave me." He turned to her, his eyes no longer human, but filled with the light of the gods. "I am not leaving you," he said, his voice a mixture of his own and something older, something eternal. "I am becoming what we needed, what the world needed." The ground trembled, and the spear's power surged, its light spreading across the battlefield, sealing the wounds of the war, mending the fractures between the clans, and stilling the gods' fury. The storm that had raged above began to clear, the stars reappearing in the sky like the eyes of ancient deities watching in silence. But the cost was eternal. Jorund's body, once whole, now shimmered with the light of the spear, his form a fusion of mortal and divine. He could feel the weight of the gods' will pressing down on him, their power entwined with his own. He was no longer a man, nor a god, but something in between, a bridge between worlds, a sacrifice that would shape the fate of mortals and immortals alike. Lysandra's tears fell, but she did not move. She knew what had to be done. As the last echoes of the gods' voices faded, the battlefield fell into a hushed stillness. The war had ended, but the price had been paid. And as the dawn broke over the island, casting its golden light over the ruins of the war, Lysandra stood at the edge of the battlefield, her heart heavy with grief, her soul bound to the memory of the man who had given everything for their world. The gods had retreated, their war paused, but their presence lingered, a reminder that the balance of the cosmos had been forever altered. And Jorund Skeldrson, the shield-bearer of the Skeld, the lover of Lysandra Drakos, stood as a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and the choices that shape the fate of all things. But as the sun rose, casting its light over the battlefield, a single question remained, unspoken but undeniable. What price had been paid for the world's survival? The answer would echo through the ages, a tale of love and loss, of gods and mortals, of a sacrifice that would never be forgotten. And the gods, watching from the shadows, knew that the story was far from over. The island of Vinland lay in silence, its scars still fresh, its wounds slow to heal. The war had left the land-scarred forests reduced to ash, the sea churned with the remnants of divine fury, and the bones of the fallen still lay beneath the soil. Yet from the ashes, the clans rose. The Skeld and Drakos, once bitter enemies, now stood together, their banners intertwined, their oaths no longer bound by blood, but by the shared memory of a sacrifice that had reshaped their world. Lysandra Drakos stood at the edge of the warband's new encampment, her crimson cloak billowing in the wind. The spear, now buried deep beneath the earth, was no longer a weapon of war, but a relic of unity, a symbol of the price paid to avert Ragnarok. Its power had been sealed, its light dimmed, but its presence lingered in the air like a whisper of the gods' will. The clans spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices carrying both reverence and fear. To some, it was a reminder of the gods' capriciousness. To others, a beacon of hope that the balance of the world had been restored. But Lysandra knew the truth. The gods had not vanished. They had merely retreated. Their war paused, not ended. Their influence still wove through the land, their whispers carried on the wind, their eyes watching from the shadows of the cosmos. The clans had rebuilt, their longhouses rising from the ruins, their fires burning with the same stubborn resilience that had defined them for generations. Jorund's name was etched into their songs, his sacrifice a tale passed from elder to child, a story of love that had defied the will of the gods. Yet for Lysandra, the weight of his absence was a wound that never fully healed. She had led the clans through the trials of the war, had forged alliances where there had been only hatred, and had guided the people through the darkness. But in the quiet moments, when the fires burned low and the stars stretched across the sky like the eyes of the gods, she felt the hollow ache of his absence. Freya Melantha, the seeress, had spoken of a new era, of a time when the gods' war would be forgotten. But Lysandra had seen the signs, the way the winds carried the scent of something ancient, the way the runes on the spear's burial site pulsed faintly in the moonlight. The gods had not abandoned the world. They had only waited one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in hues of gold and shadow. Lysandra stood at the edge of the battlefield, where the spear had been buried. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the yasa, faint, metallic tang of something older. She knelt, her fingers brushing the earth, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. A vision came not in words, but in images, in the flicker of firelight and the echo of distant thunder. She saw the spear, its shaft glowing with a light that pulsed like a heartbeat, its power not dormant, but waiting. She saw the gods, there, forms shifting between light and shadow, their eyes fixed on the mortal realm. And she saw herself standing at the center of it all, her hands trembling as she reached for the spear. The vision faded, leaving her breathless. She rose, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The gods had not finished their game. They had only delayed the next move as the warband gathered for the final rites. Lysandra stood before them, her voice steady despite the storm within her. Jorund gave everything to protect this world, she said, her words carrying the weight of history. He chose love over duty, and in doing so, he changed the fate of mortals and gods alike. Let us honor him not with sorrow, but with purpose. Let us build a future where such sacrifices are never needed again. The clans nodded, their faces etched with the same determination that had carried them through the war. But as they turned to the task of rebuilding, Lysandra lingered, her eyes on the earth where the spear lay hidden. The spear had been buried, but its power was not gone. It was a reminder of what had been lost, and what could be lost again. That night, as the stars emerged one by one, Freya Melantha approached her, her silver hair glinting in the moonlight. "The gods have not forgotten," the seeress murmured, her voice a whisper of wind and prophecy. "Their war is not over. It is only waiting for the right moment to begin again." Lysandra met her gaze, the weight of the world pressing upon her shoulders. "Then we must be ready," she said, "for the gods may have paused, but they will return." Freya's eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "And when they do, you will be the one who stands between them and the world." Lysandra did not answer. She only turned her gaze to the horizon, where the sea met the sky, and the line between mortal and divine blurred. The spear was buried. The war paused, But the legacy of Vinland was only beginning. And as the first light of dawn broke over the island, a final vision stirred in Lysandra's mind. A glimpse of a future where the gods' war would rise again, and the spear would once more be a force of fate. The saga was not over. It had only just begun. As the last echoes of the war faded into memory. A single rune, hidden deep within the earth, flared briefly before vanishing into darkness. The gods had not left. They had only waited. And in the silence of the dawn, a whisper carried on the wind. The balance is fragile, and the gods never forget. The legacy of Vinland endured, but the tale of love, sacrifice, and divine conflict was far from finished. The world had been saved, but the cost of that salvation would echo through the ages. A warning and a promise. And somewhere in the depths of the earth, the spear waited. The gods, too, watched. The saga was over, but the story was not.